Hello, one and all, and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Off the Dome. I'm your humble interviewer, Jordan Brown, and with me for the very first time is our astonishing art director. Say hi, astonishing art director.
Hi, astonishing art director.
Casey, thank you so much for joining me. This is such an exciting time for Dimension 20 on the heels of Burrow's and junior year trailer dropped yesterday. Things are happening. Not to mention a Dimension or a Rick Perry documentary.
Yes.
All very exciting stuff. So I assume because you're in you have a theater background, you've heard the expression, "How do you get to Carnegie Hall?"
Yes.
Practice.
Yes.
Yeah. So my question for you is the equivalent of how do you get to Dimension 20 Ithaca College, Ithaca College, Ithaca College?
That's the funniest thing. That's so funny. They should put that on our alumni page or something.
It's wild how many of y'all have come from Ithaca College.
It's my personal agenda. Well, I think unless there are others I don't know of, I think it started with me, and then the influx really was on Never After. That was the first big mini season back from the pandemic, and the first one that I worked on. And a lot had changed since then, including Rick Perry's living situation. He now lives on the idyllic Wes Anderson fantasy dream island that is Lopez Island, as you will see in this documentary. And, he has kids there and stuff, and he's very firmly rooted there. And so he was like, I want to make the minis here. And I was like, okay, well, we need to find model makers who will come to this mystery island and live in charmingly rustic conditions while making these models. And so I just thought of my friends from college. And so I was like, do you guys want to get into my car and drive from New York City to this island to make miniatures for a streaming show? And they were like, absolutely. So those were the first Raven and Jesse, the first two Ithaca's. And then when we got into, I think, Ravening War, we needed some more model makers who were based in LA. So we brought in Ash, who I actually didn't overlap with when in college, but Raven did, and Ash and Kari Sanchez, who was actually my college roommate. Because the show, it's a lot like theatrical set design. It's all very custom and made up and weird, and obviously miniature. And we all learn miniature making in order to make the dioramas that express our set designs. So it's a pretty natural fit. And a lot of our model makers who aren't from Ithaca have theater set design backgrounds. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very fun little trend as I've been doing these interview series, looking at everyone's resumes to be like, oh, also, so I've shout out to Foes and Fables. You did a great interview with them. So I've heard your a lot of the background story. So I really just want to dive into the wildness that is Dimension 20. Although I do. In my notes, I have things that are just incoherent to me now. I just have Tom Ford written down. Oh
yeah. Do you want me to explain that?
Sure. I know you did work with them, so yeah.
It was. That was just a very one-off, a 2-day thing for a fashion week Instagram booth, just a pretty environment in which for beautiful people to take pictures. And I basically just crumpled up Mylar, which is what the inside of a helium balloon looks like, and we we just made a little aesthetic looking enclave for a Tom Ford fashion show. Yeah. I wouldn't say Tom Ford and I are close colleagues. I never met him. I was very much a worker bee on that, but I liked it a lot, and I keep it in my portfolio. It was fun.
Yeah, I'm curious. Feels like a thing to talk to Carlos Luna about, because he is so fashion forward. Of just you get to rub that in his face, I assume. But
it's so far in the past. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of though, talking to cast members about things you worked on in the past, have you talked to Erika Ishii about Sleep No More? Because I know they're obsessed with it.
No, No, but I saw actually Raven and I were hanging out recently, and she showed me a post from Erica about going to Sleep No More, and it said like I got tickets thanks to Clara Gumbart, who was our Ithaca College set design friend, who now does the wardrobe there. And we were like, are they friends? Like, what does this mean? But we gleaned from the post that it was Erica's first time there, but maybe we misunderstood. Um, yeah, Sleep No More was I was fortunate enough to be an intern there when I was in high school because I grew up in the suburbs of New York. And I got the internship to try to best a smarmy colleague sort of in my local youth theater. He was a senior boy and I was a sophomore, and he was like he was like talking about this job website called offstagejobs.com. I don't know if they even still have it. And he was like, I got an internship on there. You wouldn't because you're a sophomore. And I was like, oh. I took to the little website and I was like, I have to get an internship to one up this smarmy boy. And then I had heard of Sleep No More, and it ended up being extremely useful for someone who wanted to do props and scenery. So I just like would do weird little Sleep No More things there, like dyeing paper in tea baths to make it look old. And then when I got out of college, I went back and I worked there as a props fabricator, mostly fixing suitcases that they would throw on the wall every night. But no, I haven't talked to Erica about it. Was she in it, or does she just like to see it a lot?
Just, I think, sees it a lot. I've heard like talk of it on like Worlds Beyond Number and like the like back things where they talk about like one of the shows. So
Not talked to her about that at all. I must. I have old like little ephemera that I've swirled away from it. Maybe I should give her a piece of ephemera.
yeah. Oh man, if I just made this connection, ooh, I feel good about this whole interview series was worth it. I know you started on Shriek Week at Dimension 20, and I really love like this like. I'm curious, like coming into that season, I mean, coming into Dimension 20 in general, but like that season specifically, like a new GM behind the screen, a very much different vibe, not in terms of like story, but like, like at a college campus. I mean, I guess Fantasy High existed, but like very specifically, like it's a headmaster, like you had like a set. I love the set, the banners, everything that you kind of worked on. What was that first process like coming in?
One, I had nothing to compare it to. And I had also, maybe ashamedly, I had never heard of the show. I never watched the show. So I wasn't coming in like, oh, wow, I'm going to meet Brendan Lee Mulligan. Like, I just thought it seemed like a cool project and I would get to use skills that I liked using. So I don't really have anything to compare it to. I mean, I thought it was, like, at the time, I was like, this is a sweet gig. I was mostly working from home. And I think the only reason the position was opened up to be more remote focused and that Rick would entertain hiring someone who lived the most across the country you could live was because we were still sort of in COVID-y times. Like so a lot of it just defaulted to more remote. But I mean, that was fine for the prep because a lot of it was just making like the banners and the little props, like the detail player material stuff, like the pamphlets were a big thing, and the pencils all had little Brom University stickers, and there's some other branded thing. I don't remember what it was. Oh, we made these Letterman jackets. We didn't make the jackets, but we got jackets that we put the patch on. And so a lot of what I was doing was just sort of like orchestrating the execution of those, which could be done from home. So I had like a solid, I think, month-ish of full-time work prepping that. And then I just came to LA to load it in and shoot it, which all took place with like under a week. And that was really made possible because my brother lives here. So I stayed with him for a bit, and I was considering, really committing to transitioning to TV and film, mostly because the pandemic kind of prompted that for me, because I was like, theater's not looking too good. It's not looking good, and I need to have some money. So I was thinking about moving to LA anyway. So I was like, okay, I'll do this job. I liked it. I thought it went. It was. I love doing graphics props and props that feel like they were made by a character within a story. So it didn't strike me. But then as I've worked on the show since, I'm like, that was a very different season. Yeah. But I think it was a good one to come in on. It wasn't too challenging. it wasn't. At least it didn't feel to me to be very stressful. They weren't asking for a lot. There weren't like crazy minis or anything. And then it was Starstruck, which was a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
I threw on my
Yes.
deeply faded Starstruck. It is it's one of my favorite shirts. I just love the blue, and I love like I also live in Austin, Texas, which
Oh,
makes this shirt just an absolute nightmare to wear because no one gets the reference, but they see Keep Boston Weird, and they're like,
is that a
what? And I'm like,
typo?
I can't explain this to you. Like, I'm like, there's no universe in which like person I'm interacting with for 10 seconds I can be like, so there's a show where people play D&D.
Do you know what D&D is? Let's start
Yeah,
there. I know
and in
exactly what you
this,
mean.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, in this world, there's a planet for Texas. Anyway, but Starstruck I it was solidly my favorite season before Burrow's End, and then Abria fucked up my whole world by coming in with that season of just incredibleness. But before we get to that, yeah, Starstruck, can you talk me through like how much was that you learning on the fly of like we're gonna build this all in Tailspire and like like mini shoots are obviously very different because they're not you with a camera like swooping in; it's all in the computer.
Yeah, it was very different. It felt almost like we were making a video game. And I think Rick and I were both learning like when we had to get digital sculptor artists like ZBrush artists, we had to sort of learn the niches of that industry. Like, okay, it seems like some of them are more hard surface modelers and other are organic modelers. We didn't know that was a thing, but that's good to know. But I really liked it. I felt like we were able to do a ton of design on that season because, while I love the tactile nature of the minis, there is so much logistics that goes into them, like ordering the supplies and they have to come on time and things have to dry and you have to cut stuff right or, whereas it's not like the digital world, it's without its considerations, but I feel like we were able to get to uh products faster and and yeah, it was also really fun analyzing the world of Starstruck. I mean, I spent a good week or two paid on the book's time just reading that book and at first I just did a read for general comprehension and I was like, all right, we're gonna have to try again. This is a dense book. And then I went through and basically made in an internal art department like encyclopedia of that world. Like, what do doors look like here? What do plants look like here? What does the sky look like here? And made like an appendix almost. And that was really cool to dive into the source material like that, and then to be as we, Tailspire has its limitations, and so does Hero Forge, which were the main programs we were using. But wherever possible, we tried to, stay true to the color palette and the shapes of Starstruck, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, I sort of was longing for minis. I was like, I thought there were going to be minis on this show, but this is cool too. People keep talking about these minis. When am I going to get some minis? But yeah, I liked it a lot. It was like it was just a lot of coordinating, like when assets were due, and like our artists work on all these different time zones. But I was really proud of like the Rec 97
Mhm.
battle. Like so much, it looked so. I think it looked a bit effortless, but so much went into like all like the blinking signs and stuff. Like we had to, find graphics within the graphic novel to reference, and then have a graphic designer make graphics for them. And then Shawbach he worked with Henan to bring them into the program, and like they made them look like LED and like they were flashing, and it was really cool. Um, and also, all credit to the mini shoot on that for Shawbach. That was him in his kitchen, doing that for hours and hours and hours. So I wasn't involved in that, but it turned out great, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think, such a dynamic season, and I would love to have a Starstruck where you've built minis, but I don't know, there was something that like, yeah, there's something that like felt really appropriate to have like a sci-fi season. It's on computers, like it felt like
Right.
it matched very well tonally. Um, But then you did get your minis. And boy, did you get them in Never After.
Right. I did have it a little bit in Coffin Run. That was my first one with minis. It was a more limited season. You know, the palette was black and white. We did, we were very grateful to get a lot of materials from Dwarven Forge because it was on a pretty tight timeline. But I did get a dip in the minis world then. But yes, boy did we on Never After. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's Never After's minis were so. I mean, that was Raven coming in and making wolf soup and the terrible dogfish and like such iconic minis in that season. What is so? I hate to be the like, what's your process like as an art? What does it mean to be an art director? But like, what is the process of like a big mini season like that? Of from where are you at in terms of like Brennan's vision? And obviously, I'm sure it's going to be similar to like Abria's vision for Burrow's End. But like, how did that all come about?
What does it mean to be an art director? I'll let you know when I figure it out. I like the job because it's sort of just like I guess like the motto of it, like in my head when I'm doing it, is just make it happen. Just whatever it is, I consider it my personal responsibility to make it happen. And it doesn't mean that I'm doing it all by myself, but it's almost like you have to that doesn't make sense. But I guess like a good way of putting it is it's like the liaison between the creative and the execution. So I guess the way that the process starts is that, and this sort of also explains the way like the whole art department season starts, but it starts with creative meetings between Rick and the DM, which I am on, but as an observer, I'm taking notes and I'm listening very keenly, and starting to think about, as ideas get more serious, I'm like, how are we going to make them? I start researching materials and stuff. And I also just need to be really dialed in to the story from day one to know what's going on. So we do that, and then there's a period where it's like, okay, they've been talking for a really long time, like probably like 20 collective hours of talking about what the season is. And at some point, all of the ideas that have been thrown out need to just get like collated and itemized into an actionable list. And I feel like that's where I start to come in and help a lot. Like we have a battle tracker that's just like a big spreadsheet, and it has every battle, and it's like these are the minis that are in the battle, and this is the terrain that's in the battle. And then I always have a moment with myself where I go through every single item and I'm like, is there a plan for this? And if there's not, I'm like, well, we got to get a plan going here. And if there is a plan, I'm like, how am I going to measure this plan and make sure that it is happening at the right time, and looking the way that we want it to look? So I feel like I spend a lot of time with calendars and spreadsheets, but then also, mood boards and research decks and things like that. And then the amount that I've been in the shop has, it fluctuates. It's fluctuated throughout my experience in terms of how much I'm the one actually executing things. Like, and I think it also depends on the size of the season. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it actually leads me perfectly into a design board that you have up on your website for the frog prints from Never After. Yeah, can you talk me through like that kind of like, I mean, that kind of process of like, all right, I've got like a design board with like a bunch of images on it. How am I going to transfer that into a frog with a crown on his head?
Yeah, totally. And also just like full, I appreciate that I participate in the act of, assisting with the design and helping execute it, but the vision for that character is entirely Rick, and the player, who played him?
Murph.
Murph. I was thinking Brad in my head. There's no Brad. But I mean, it's really so. Rick will have. I mean, first I make a template for all of our decks and like the little title block that's at the bottom, and I try to make it evocative of the season. And often that's the first asset we're creating is the title block. And it's sort of an opportunity to challenge ourselves to be like, okay, what is the aesthetic of this whole thing? And even though it's just, and by title block, I mean the little like stamp with information that's at the bottom of each mood board that says my name and Rick's name and the title of the season and the date. They're always themed. So one, just sort of like making the asset in which we are going to deliver the information. And then it's kind of like half, I'd say like 70-30, like me being 30. Like I sometimes will put some images in there that I found. Sometimes it's all of Rick's images, but regardless, I take all the images and I put them in there. And then lately we've done more pre-visualization of the edits that we want to see happen on the minis. We used to just describe them to Shane, who's the primary person who at least at the time was making them. But now, and actually Raven helped sort of pioneer this a little bit. If there's supposed to be like a significant kit bash, which is a modification from the mini that gets printed out, we'll go in now and Photoshop what we want that to look like, so that the image of the mini that we're giving to Shane or whoever's going to be kit bashing and painting it is pretty close to what we want it to look like, and we're relying less on verbal description. So, we make that document, and then, I'm probably the one scheduling a meeting with me, Shane, and Rick to, talk through what's in the document and what the important things are. And then I'm like, all right, Shane, do you need anything? Do you need, these are what paint colors do you need? All that. And then, sort of checking in on the progress of all the minis. Shipping, Shane works in Virginia, so it's like, okay, this is when we need them. This is when they need to get here. It's a lot of the logistics of all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think, and, I think those attention to details obviously are seen very well throughout the show, which speaks to, a solid art director, helping like guide those visions. I am curious, so getting into Burrow's End, what is, and you said you're on as like an observer in those early meetings, but I've heard that Brennan's notes for a season are basically nothing. Like Carlos Luna told me it's like, like a bullet point, 2 words, 3 lines down, bullet point, 3 words kind of thing. Is his art direction at least better in terms of what's happening? Because I know he doesn't write notes for when he's DMing. And how does that compare to like Abria coming in for Burrow's End?
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever had a reason to need to read Brennan's personal notes. I'd say that but it would make sense for Carlos. I'd say that the meetings are just more like a conversation. Like they remind me of a writer's room, and Rick almost taking that's why he has the creative producer title. It doesn't have that isolated feeling of like, okay, now we have to do the sets, let's talk about that in isolation. It really feels like they're talking about the whole story and the whole vision, and the battles are sort of checkpoints and markers in the development of the plot. My little theater brain thinks of them like if we were doing a musical, the musical numbers, like, we stop and we're of a different tempo now, but a good musical number will always move along the plot and use that departure from the normal rhythm of things to make a big story push. So, I think Brennan has a lot to say during those conversations. I'd say it's like 50-50 talking between him and Rick, and sometimes there are visitors, but I've never I think sometimes there's a little I think a DM, and particularly one who's as great at improvising as Brennan, sometimes there's a little bit of a push like, hey, we like need to kind of lock this down because we need to make the minis. Whereas in a home game, the DM could just wait and make it up later. But so sometimes there's a little bit of like push and pull there. But I think ultimately it helps the fact that we need information in a concrete way sooner than might be needed in a home game. I think it helps make the story feel more curated. That's what I like about Dimension 20. Like, yes, it like explores sometimes, but like it really feels like there is an arc. And I think that the intentionality around the process is the reason for that.
Yeah. So was the bear your patter song of Burrow's End?
Yeah. Boy, we got trouble. Yes, yes. It was I think it's a Sondheim's list song of just all the most disgusting, horrific, like, and kidneys and livers and beating hearts ack. Yeah, I guess it was that. Yeah, Abria was just like, I want a big old bear, and we were like, are you sure? No, I mean, like, where Rick is just incredibly, he's just very down. He's like, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. Like, he always says, like, I mean, we can do anything. And my my logistics brain will just short circuit. I'm like, I don't know, we can do anything. Can we do? I don't know about that. And then I'll usually be proven wrong. And I'm like, well, I guess we could do that.
Yeah, I know the one thing you can't do is cut a hole in the table. That is the one thing Rick has said no to.
Yes, we ended up drilling one because now we a lot of the maps incorporate like a light board. Like, it looks almost like that you would trace on in art school. I think we made that. I think we had it made for Burrow's End, and now we're using it in. It feels so weird to say Fantasy High. I'm like used to it being a secret. In Fantasy High.
Trailers out. We've seen some minis.
I went and I mentally I made myself check this morning. I was like, is it out? Am I allowed? I was like, I know it's out. I know it's out. But what was I saying? Oh, in order to use that, we did have to drill a hole for the plug. Yeah. So, but no one's ever gonna see that in a million years. But yeah, that's the one. That's generally the one thing we can't do. It's a very nice table. We don't need to be making big holes on our nice table.
So Burrow's End was such a striking season, both like dramatically phenomenal performances from everyone, but also so I've said like a new bar set in terms of production value, both the DM screen, the neutral board, and obviously the battle maps. I know when we first started talking about this, you had said that you were most involved in that final battle of the season. But sort of, can you talk me through like those, like, I guess kind of 3-4-ish battles? I mean, you had one that flipped to a secondary location, but I mean, how did all of that sort of come about this season?
Yeah, I think Rick and Abria and Carlos had a long sort of ideation session where they basically came up with all of those at once, and then they brought them to Rick and were like, can we do this, please? So I think a lot of the broad strokes for those battles came just straight out of Abria's mind. And then in terms of executing them, I mean, the biggest of shout outs to Kelsey Hunter. I think, that is where a lot of that's been an enormous shift, her in this role of model shop manager, because that role used to kind of just be baked into art director, and it requires its own position. There's a ton to do outside of managing the model shop and the model makers, and it used to just be folded into what I was doing. But we had her on pretty early, and we could just be like, okay, Kelsey, you go figure out like where are we gonna get these bear organs, and the puzzle mechanism. She like did research into slide puzzles and like made files to send to get laser cut to make these pieces that interlocked together. And so I think we got about to that point of development, which is like battle 2.5, when we started making the models. And by we, I mean they. I was still remote in New York at this point, so she became a bit more involved in overseeing the model makers in the shop, and then I took more of a hand on, we worked together like really closely. I took more of a hand on the battle, or the element of the second battle that had that pipe. We worked with a great carpenter, Kyle Smith, who made that from scratch, but at first we were thinking maybe we would get a real pipe or like a plant pot or something, but all of them were like slightly wrong. So we were like, okay, we just have to custom make this. So I went into the computer and made a 3D model of exactly what it needed to be. Because, basically when you're asking someone to make something very specific and precise, custom, it's great to be able to give them a document. At other times it's nice to just like give them a vibe and let them be expressive and work from a loose drawing. Like the DM screens are often like that because they're just like rolling hills that don't need the same level of precision as like this pipe thing that has to fit together perfectly. So I worked more on that and sort of liaising with the carpenter who made that. And then also, the final battle, we knew that was all going to have to be laser cutting because of all the holes. And so Rick provided a pretty thorough drawing, like just a top-down ground plan. And then I made a 3D model of that and sort of extruded the shapes and figured out what files we would need to send to the laser cutter to then assemble that. And I love that kind of stuff. I love that level of involvement, sort of like thinking about it from a bird's eye view, like, okay, how are we going to make this thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that final battle was, horrifying in the best possible way. And I think all the time, whenever I see, every battle is like, it has that level of detail and like cleverness to it. What goes into testing out, trying. I know Rick has talked to me about like trying to be kind of in the mindset of the players, but like how much of that is also in your thought process of like, okay, well, they might, for example, use the butthole of the bear as an entry point. Like how much of that like goes into like how you are thinking about that in terms of like, all right, well, I want to laser cut these things, but what if, Rashawn kicks a gun in the final battle?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's I think Rick is really great about thinking from a player's perspective because he's just played for so long. And I try to think that way too. I think part of it is just like from a practical perspective of like, durability. Like these things are going to be picked up and used as game pieces. So there's that angle. And then there's like, we really try to make the sets intuitive because we don't really get to go in and be like, okay, so here's what you can do here and here's how this is going to work. Like, for instance, on the slide puzzle, it's probably pretty clear from looking at it that it's a puzzle, but there was one point we were working with them and it's like, okay, it like works if you wiggle it slightly this way, but we were like, we don't, if this were like a live action movie, we could tell the actor that, but we don't get to tell them that. So it has to be, as intuitive as like a well-designed tool or, phone app. So it's almost like thinking from like a user interface and experience perspective, which I like doing. Like even this is a tangential example, but on Coffin Run, when Jasmine had that blood cup thing, we made this little holder for the vials of blood that no one was ever going to see. But we spent a lot of time thinking about like, what is the right height for her hand to just naturally want to land there? What is the easiest and quickest way for these vials to be removed? And just that sort of smoothness of process so they can focus on playing and having fun and feeling empowered by the art tools we're giving them and not obstructed. So there's that, but then there's also what the camera sees, which is a huge part of it. And that was a big consideration on the reactor battle because we wanted these columns or these I-beams and like a beam going around them so there could be a crane on it. I think we ended up changing that. But another advantage of working in the 3D model is I can put the camera in the model where the real camera is going to be on set and see if things are obstructing the performer's faces because or obstructing a bria. So thinking about what the camera sees is important, and I try to keep an eye on that too.
Yeah. And obviously, like, you can't predict if you give someone I guess maybe you can predict. You give someone a blood cup, they're going to drink from it.
We wanted her to drink from the blood cup, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, also one of the things that you have a huge hand in is the mini shoots
Oh yeah.
post-season.
Hmm.
And I know you talked about it, and I know you said you can't believe people are so excited about it, but Pinocchio running, I have to ask you about it. It's amazing.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I think a lot of credit goes to Schwabach for his direction there. I should try to find a clip of it, but like we did maybe 5 takes, and he was, he's always so nice about his notes, but he was just like, I think it needs to be clackier. I was like, okay, sure, yes, and like thinking about how to translate that into a movement. I have a big background in puppetry. That was like what I was doing first out of college. I'm more building puppets, but I took a ton of classes in actually how to manipulate puppets and bring life into objects because in order to make good puppets you have to think about how they're going to be used, just like minis kind of. So I like getting to pull on that a little bit, like, okay, clacky equals rotate wrist more, got it. um it was very fun. I like when we lean into the limitations and weirdness of the minis. I think the reason people like that is because it felt like a toy. Like you can imagine yourself being like, I'm playing with the toy. And that's I've noticed those are the moments people seem to like, or like when one mini stabs the other and it feels very action figure-y, and we're just really leaning into the language that these are game tokens essentially. Yeah, but that was a fun moment.
Yeah, and I know like this season you got a lot of those. I mean, not those moments, but like a lot of the really cool actiony moments of like chipmunks with tentacles coming out of their mouths, like wrapping around. Like, how do you how does that work in like post for you? Of like, hey, we're gonna shoot this. How do you line up those kinds of shots?
Exactly. So during the main, shooting when they're sitting, also, have my answers been too rambly? I feel insane.
Not at
Or
all. No,
okay,
no,
it's just
no.
inappropriate.
They're absolutely they're
Okay,
perfect in every way.
okay, like have I drinking too much coffee? I guess it's not like a normal conversational cadence. So I'm like, oh no, I'm dominating the conversation. Alarm bells are going off, but it's an interview, not a conversation. So I guess that's normal.
Yeah, I will tell you like the great thing about this is it makes it so much easier for me to cut because I'm just like I cut out my question and then I have your answer. When it's like so, Abria and I talked for like an hour and 15 minutes and it was really conversational. And I haven't gotten through to like cut it yet, and I'm just like nightmare thinking about like how do I cut myself out of this
Yeah.
because it's just like us back and forth yelling at each other for like an hour. Like anyway, but yes, no, this is
Okay.
fantastic.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. So Oh, okay. So while the players are at this table, Shawwalk is sitting with his laptop open and writing a shot list then and there. When he hears, a big story beat or visual moment that's probably going to want to be supported with a mini shot, he writes it down. Writing probably 2 times the amount of shots that we're actually going to get. But something like when Izzy's like, "I have all the tongues in my hand," like I saw him be like, "That's a fucking mini shot." So he makes that list, and he really envisions the shots. um and then maybe like a couple weeks before the mini shoot, or sometimes it ends up happening in the middle of the season and we do some of the battles we've taped. It's sort of all over the place as to when we do it. um he sends that out, and then I go through and highlight ones that sound like they're going to involve some kind of preparation. And it's been happening more and more lately. And also, my God, on Fantasy High, like every single one was like, I cast this crazy spell that looks like this. So I make note of all those, or things where it's like, I swing an axe or I throw a rock, whatever, something that's not already in the mini itself that we can use. And then I make a list of those off to the side. And then the way we did it this season was we divided it up very cleanly, where Raven made all of those things. We call them the effects. And then I was we call it like at the table, like actually being like Raven would, being Raven, like lay them out in like this perfect neat little labeled list on this table outside of the art office for me, like labeled by each shot, because everything she does is immaculate. And then I say, okay, thank you, Fireball, and I take it over to the table, and then I put it in the mini's hand, and then I really tried to challenge myself this season to think even more about composition and to think even more about composition and tableaus and really looking in the frame and making it feel like a like a good shot. Even if it was more of like a still image or just like we did a lot more like slow revolves around the minis this season. That was Shabak's idea, and I really liked that. And because we weren't spending as much time being like, okay, Casey, now you have to make this mini bonk this mini, and it was more just like setting up pretty pictures. Um, I tried to focus on making those beautiful. And then if there's any manipulation of minis, there's often, I'd say like maybe 30 or 40% of this shot, maybe 50, involves some kind of cueing or participation from me during the shot. Like, or, we're often rigging. This is my favorite. I love it so much. We're like rigging things to the front of the camera. Like if we're following a spell into someone's face, and then it's like I might have a stick on the mini, like ready to like knock it down or whatever. And so yeah, that's pretty much how that works. And then on the day of, when it's Shabak he's sitting at a desk. We're all in the studio together. The minis are all laid out like they were during gameplay, and then he has a big TV up of the players at the table, and then he's scrubbing forward and listening, and sometimes playing out loud for us how the shot is described. And then, sort of in that moment, it's like sometimes he's like, the camera needs to be here, and then we're gonna track, and this is gonna be here, and that's that. And then other times it's like, okay, so we need to capture the moment of the fireball hitting her. How do we want to do that? It's often like just trying to get variety. Like, well, we already did it this way. We already did it this way. What's a new way to do it? And then sometimes the idea comes from me or from Kevin, or sometimes it's a combination. It often feels like we're challenging each other. Like, what if we did this? Uh, so it's not like all storyboarded ahead of time. It's kind of improvisational and often in response to the scenery. Like, when we put the bear on the table, I forget who said it first, but both me and Kevin were like, we got to get a camera through the bear hole, right? Like the shot where the inside is introduced, like no one planned that. If we just were like, oh yeah, it has a hole in it from like chipmunk damage, and we're like, we got to put the camera in there. So yeah, that's pretty much how that works, and then we just do it for 12 hours a day until we're done.
Yeah. What cameras are you using that can fit in a bear hole?
I highly recommend talking to Kevin Stiller, the DP, because he is so passionate about this and basically has devised this very, very specific rig that I don't think is being used, that isn't being used anywhere else. The lens, it's a probe lens. We used to use an Osmo, which was significantly bigger. I don't know the brand name of this, but I know it's referred to as a probe lens, but it's very cool. It's like the diameter is like my watch, about that size. And he sometimes has a configuration where it's like he could do it where it's like a telescope and the lens is at the end and it's pointing, like that's how we got the bear shot. And then there's also a version where it's more like a periscope, and it's like it's on a long rod, like that. It's just like an extrude that's just like goes up like this, and then sometimes the lens is like coming out of it like this. So and then like that whole thing is on a dolly, and then there's also a thing where it could basically just do any movement you want. It's very cool. And yeah, I'm often being like, Kevin, what if we put the camera through this tiny little space? And he's like, oh my god. But I know he loves it. He loves it deep down. He loves the challenge. We're kind of just always giving each other shit a little bit, where he'll be like, Casey, can you tie this thing to the camera? And I'm like, fuck you. But it's all, it's very much with love and in jest. But yeah, I mean, he could tell you, he would probably scoff at my description of it. He could tell you a lot more. He's very passionate about it, and it's very specific. It's a fun way of shooting things, because it's like when you're working in miniature, you're just really not bound by reality and physics in the same way. It's like, oh, we're gonna make somebody fly? No problem. We just glue a stick to their back. Whereas if you wanted to do that in live action, it would be like, oh my god, we gotta get a stunt actor and a trampoline or something. Like you can just do whatever, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you mentioned, at least in our back and forth, that you had like a 3D file that I'm not sure what
Oh
3D
yeah.
file. I
Oh,
assume it's from
for
Burrow's end.
yeah, from the reactor battle. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
just like
Yes.
to talk more about the process for how that set was made. Um, I will do the sharing. Okay, can you see this?
It's got 3 purple dots.
Oh boy. Yeah, that's the whole battle now. I think it's just loading. Sometimes SketchUp can be ambitious for
There we go.
okay.
I see it. Yes.
Okay. So actually I'll show you first it in in the table. So this, we
Mm-hmm.
have this, complete model of what the dome looks like, and particularly because we had this new dome made in a new building recently. We have like a really up-to-date file showing exactly where it sits and stuff, which is great. Excuse me. And then so before, this was, I think, a bit of a work in progress. We were figuring out where those I-beams were going to land. I was saying earlier how we can set up the shot in the camera that we're going to see
Mm-hmm.
and note things like, oh, that's getting a little too close to her face there, huh? So yeah, the way it can be a little finicky. So this was sort of figuring out the scale of all this stuff. And also, we were thinking about scale a lot because the minis were like 10 inches, 12 inches tall. And so we were just trying to be mindful of like, what is a stoat going to look like in that scale? So this ended up, I just made a new file to be the final one. The color coding doesn't really relate to the final product. I was more color coding based on thickness of materials because
Mm-hmm.
the way that we did this is like once Rick approved, like, okay, this is the layout, which is like very close to his drawing, I then sort of picked up each of these pieces and I was like, okay, this is one of my 1/4 inch pieces. And I sort of would like make a pile off to the side. And then that pile ends up being exported into something like this, which we send to a laser cutter. And they cut, and then they send us like a pack. Like it looks like a 3D model kit because it's essentially what it is, with all these shapes that we then put together. Because acrylic, which is some people refer to as plexiglass, it's not like you can like cutting out a circle by hand without a laser cutter is a nightmare. So all of these, just had to be sort of precisely laid out beforehand. And yeah, then especially like all these holes, like this would have been terrible to drill. So yeah, we send those and we get them back, and then we put them together and paint them, and then we put a ton of this was really just getting the bare bones of like getting the information we needed to do the laser cutting. But then, there was a lot of aesthetic treatments to them, like the painting and then all this rock debris that was made. Yeah, I think that was one of our most like necessarily planned ahead of time ones because you can't like improvise with a material like that. Like it can't really be cut easily. It's so it just sort of needs to all be figured out beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't have Rick run in and just like chop something off and be like, now this like tower that
Right.
was part of the set can like run around because you animated it somehow. Yeah.
Exactly. One cool thing though to make it seem like a reactor had exploded there was the model makers took a heat gun to those I-beams, and like the way that the plastic melted was really cool, and that's how we got that melty twisted effect that you see in the final product. It was very cool.
Yeah. It's very, very cool. Are you on set for that point as well, or are you off like running whatever next season you're shooting?
It's kind of in between. We've started often prepping 2 seasons at once. It wasn't like that before. Um, so like for this one, I really like, my goal is always to just sit and watch it, but often I get, because I really want to know the story. So for the mini shoot, it's really helpful to know like what actually happened. I usually end up actually absorbing like 30-40% of it. But I'll get an update from the lore keeper, or the shot list often tells me like the basics of what I need to know. I wish I were just sitting there more and watching it, but often there's something to do on the next battle, or there's work on the next season to be done. And I think like by the time I remember during we were calling it Stoats before we knew the title. I remember toward the end of Burrow's End, I was sitting in a side room, like on the soundstage, but an office to the side with Rick, planning out one of the Fantasy High battles. Even though I was not the art director on that season, because they overlapped so closely, we brought in the amazing Alison Gondek to art direct that one. And definitely when that's out, I think you would love talking to her. She was a rock star. But what was I saying? Yeah, so it depends. If there's another season coming up, or sometimes there's an auction, that's always like a challenge mode during production. It's like, okay, and we also have an auction, or there's some issue with the auction. So it really depends. So I'd say like the goal is to be sitting and watching, but I try to be flexible with my expectations around meeting that goal.
Yeah, I mean that's a perfect transition then of like how does it feel to have the I mean you get the art team shout outs. Obviously I talk to everybody that it's obviously very cool that like you get those acknowledgments, and it's not just like Rick Perry did this, like it's Rick Perry, Casey, Raven, like it's like they're gonna, like Brendan's gonna read a list of people, which I think is very cool. But also like how does it feel like fan response as well of like people know you as the Pinocchio runner, like it's like what is that like?
Honestly, I don't feel all that dialed into that. I got locked out of my Discord account somehow with like a 2-factor thing. So I don't know. I'm just not in there anymore. Maybe I got to make a new one, but I'm not on Twitter. Sometimes I go on Reddit. Sometimes when I was feeling like masochistic, I would go in and like to the Discord and just like command search the word minis and be like, has anyone insulted us? No. Okay. And then move on. Like, so I guess I'm not that aware of it. I guess, I've started posting videos on TikTok, and people seem to like those, and there don't really seem to be any haters, which is nice. But I guess like, I don't know. I don't really, where do I have to go to learn about all this stuff? So I got to be on Twitter? Is that what's happening?
I quit Twitter a long time ago, so I see it on TikTok.
TikTok.
And,
yeah. Twitter seems weird. Yeah, I've sort of stayed away from Twitter. But in general, I think less thinking about like my particular identity with the show, and more just I like the feeling a lot that people know the show. I mean, it's not like it's a big Hollywood blockbuster that like is a household name and everyone has seen, but it's beloved. I much would rather work on something that's genuinely beloved by few, as opposed to sort of known by many. And when I chose to not focus my career around theater so much, that was part of the reason. I felt like what I was doing was not really part of the fabric of the culture. I was like, the only people who are seeing this are the people who happen to be in New York City and who can afford it. And it felt like a little like elite and sort of cottage industry-y. And I love working at Dropout because I feel like my actual peers watch it even without my knowing that I work on it, or yeah. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the impact it has on people, and I'm always very happy to hear that someone has even watched it, let alone liked it, let alone watched something that I did in particular. It's a good feeling to feel that it's consumed by my peers.
Yeah, I can tell you with 100% certainty it is connected with very many people. It's the reason why I exist on the internet as like a weird little micro celebrity person. It's a bizarre world. But
Yeah. I think it's probably good that I keep my head out of it a little bit. I'm like, I don't know, it seems like people like this. Like that's the way I came into it. Like, who's Brennan? What's this? I don't know. And I think it's just better that I just keep it that way in my head.
yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. Well, if people wanted to see those behind the scenes TikToks, where can they find you?
Oh, like what's the name of my TikTok account? I don't know. I
Yes.
think it's probably just that tells, I think it's KC McGeorge. Let's see. Um, yeah, there it is. Ah, okay. Yes, it's just letter K, letter C, McGeorge. I go through fits and bursts of how frequently I post. It's mostly behind the scenes, mostly of the mini shoot, because I feel like that's the most interesting thing to watch. Like no one needs to watch me make a spreadsheet. And it's really like I'm not trying to get much out of this. Although I would love to make minis for people. I'm just gonna plug myself right now. I would love to do commissions. If anyone wants that, hit me up. You can message me on this TikTok. Or like to make when I was doing the laser cuts for this battle set, I was like, I could easily do this for people. They could send me the set they want. I could make all these laser pieces and then send them a kit in the mail to make a custom battle set. So I would be super into that. But yeah, that's you can check out my stuff. I'm just like having fun telling people about what I do.
Yeah, and you heard it here first. Get Casey to like build your own minis. You'll have like officially unlicensed Dimension 20 props.
You shouldn't. I don't know about all that. And to be clear, I'm not saying sets from Dimension 20. I'm saying you have like like a vision.
I'm saying it.
Yeah. No, Jordan, no, this is illegal. We're gonna put in jail. No, that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening.
Yeah, not at all what's happening. Wink. There's.
Sorry, it's not what's happening.
Yes, no. Original KC McGeorge art pieces could be yours for commission. There we go. Well then, Casey, thank you so much for joining me. This was fantastic. I'll see you next week for the big production roundtable with so many folks that I actually owe you such a huge debt for, because it was your email where you're like, hey, is this one-on-one? Or are we doing like a production roundtable? And my brain went, am I allowed to do a production roundtable? And then I asked Rick and he was like, yeah, I'd love to. That's great. We don't ever get to all sit down together. And I was like, yes, I will facilitate this. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for joining me. I can't wait to hear more. We're all excited for junior year and Never Stop Blowing Up, whatever that is, because they did at least announce that is the next season. That's not that's in the FAQ for junior year. The next season is Dimension 20, Never Stop Blowing Up. That is literally the only detail about it. So we don't know what it is, but everyone's excited and speculating wildly. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah.